Okay, good morning everybody and welcome back. Thanks for being so prompt in returning after morning tea. Hope you're all appropriately loaded up with sugar and caffeine and ready to roll into this one. Okay, so welcome to the session on the whole truth from services in trial sites. That's a big ask, isn't it? But we're going to get the whole truth in the next few minutes of this discussion. We have three presenters who are going to each talk about an aspect of their experience of working in their trial site, and we'll have group discussion around these cute little tables. So again, people coming in, there are more spaces down the front in here and across the other side of the room. And then we'll open it up for general Q&A around the room. So keep your questions coming. Also, I remind you about tweeting. Feel free to add comments and questions via Twitter, and also to use the question board out near the registration desk as well. Okay, let's begin with a presentation from Cheryl Pollard from Duo. Welcome, Cheryl. Thank you.
Hello everybody, and look, I might just say, if you think we're squinting out at you and we can't identify where the questions are coming from, we've got this magnificent spotlight on it, so please bear with us. And another thing I'd like to say up front, I am going to follow my notes because there's just so much that I was trying to capture in the information that I wanted to pass on to you. So as was mentioned, my name's Cheryl Pollard and I'm the Chief Executive of Duo Services Australia. And I'd like to start by acknowledging and pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, past and present. So as background, Duo is one of the largest and most responsive agencies in and around the ACT, providing flexible and ongoing support in the home and community for Canberrans with a disability, those who are frail and aged, living with a mental illness and their families and carers. We deliver our services in the home and in the community through support workers and volunteers who we've trained, skilled and carefully matched to meet the needs of individuals and families, to enable support to be provided when and where it is most needed and wanted. Duo is a not-for-profit company, limited by guarantee, governed by a board. We provide in excess of 275,000 hours of support annually. Approximately half of these hours are to support people with disabilities, to almost 4,900 Canberrans. We have an annual budget of 17 million, a paid workforce in excess of 400, and we've got a commitment from over 50 long-term volunteers. Duo is not only an organisation that understands community needs, but an example of the new type of business model and innovation inspired by the NDIS and the aged care reforms. As an indication of the array of services we provide, Respite's uppermost, social support, personal care, domestic assistance, major cleans, home and garden maintenance, linen services, and so on. I'm very excited to be here today to share my perspective on the NDIS as it relates to the ACT trial site. I fully support and always have the philosophy, intent and purpose of the NDIS. I'm sure we can all appreciate the enormity of the task being undertaken by the NDIA, and Bruce gave a wonderful presentation this morning on just where they're at and what's going on. But it's also an enormous task for other stakeholders, including ourselves, in bringing about this fundamental reform. And I look forward to the questions that you're going to pose to us. So we were set three questions. The first one was what was the biggest challenge and how we overcame it. And as you'll appreciate, challenges are occurring every day as we transition into the trial, which is only 4 months at the moment, only been in the ACT for the past 4 months. However, at the moment, I think without doubt, the biggest challenge is around communication and engagement with the NDIA, our current funding bodies, of course people with disabilities, our staff and the community in general. Communication and engagement is imperative to successful transition so that as a service, so that as people with disabilities and as service providers, we have an understanding of how, when, what and where all aspects of our business will be impacted and what we need to do to be NDIS ready. Fundamental to this is engaging with the NDIA to participate in the processes as we learn, build and change alongside them to shape the design so that we can achieve the desired outcomes of a successful scheme in which people with disabilities have choice and control in their daily lives. For example, how and when are plans developed? Will service providers have an opportunity to lend their experience and expertise in developing plans? When will the transition from block to individualised funding occur for individuals? And when will agencies be aware of their transition to reduce impact on cash flow? The ACT is quite unique in the pilot being experienced there, in that our current block funding is being slowly eroded as they have anticipated how many people will be transitioning into the NDIS. So cash flow is of critical importance to us, and understanding who has transitioned. How does the portal work? And when it doesn't, what can we do to sort out the issues? And how long will it take? So a great example yesterday, there was some providers from the ACT got together with the NDIS, and one of them was saying that when they did their last update on the portal, which was at least 4 or so weeks ago, a number of providers' names disappeared. So they're registered, but they're not there. So as a person with a disability going through the planning process and looking at what providers they might use, that their choice is limited because a lot of the providers aren't being shown. What do the pricing clusters mean in reality to current and future service delivery? What do agencies do when the pricing is not affordable for their service? And how are individual family expectations relationships managed? And how does the change in travel payments to staff working in an industrial environment when the first hour is being reduced to 40 minutes? A final challenge being experienced in the ACT is that if a person with a disability is not already in the system through HAC or other funding types, they're not going to have access to any supports until their cohort is ready to be transitioned into the NDIS. So that's over a 2-year period, and that's very, very concerning and hasn't been addressed at this point. The NDIA, ACT Government and PECS have provided many forums and workshops well in advance of and after launch. These have been informative, but still general confusion on many issues continue to exist. And again, I believe a communication and engagement strategy that focuses on responding to individual agency requests, changes to policies and practices would be beneficial and contribute to improving the trial to achieve better outcomes for everybody. In the meantime, Duo is actively involved in participating in all opportunities to learn about the NDIS and its rollout, including speaking with individuals and families and learning from their experiences, participating in bi-monthly meetings, which have only just commenced in the ACT with other providers and the NDIA. It's also worthwhile participating in any other relevant forums, such as the one I engage in with the National Respite Association and other agencies in pilot sites across Australia, and regularly reviewing the NDIA website and reading any other relevant materials to keep yourself as informed as possible. So question 2 was around what was the most important preparation that we did. So I suppose since discussions around an NDIS first started, Duo had already actively started working towards the preparation of the NDIS to ensure we had a footprint and that we would continue into the new paradigm as being seen as one of the the best service providers, and that we were well established as we transitioned. The most important preparation undertaken was in 2013 when two of Canberra's leading community service providers merged to become Duo. The merger is already fulfilling its potential to provide a broader and better array of services to the community. We're able to offer new opportunities to staff, and we're strengthening our future position as an organisation of choice, where people are having greater choice and control in purchasing the services they need and want. Other important preparation that we did, and as part of creating a new organisation, was a new strategic plan which focused on the consolidation of the merger and transition to the NDIS. And look, we're stepping into the planning process again in December. I think it's very important to keep that current because the consolidation has occurred, and now it's very much about what's going to be, our future opportunities. We established a fee-for-service arm so that we could better understand how to work in a business-like environment. We introduced new and improved client management and financial systems to create operational efficiencies and effectiveness. And I'd have to say that in the past 18 months, that's been the hardest thing that we have done, but we're getting there. We gained independent expert advice from consultants to improve all aspects of our business. We consulted with people with disabilities and their families who use our services to find out what's working and not working so well, and what they'd like to see in the future from us, so we could gain a greater understanding of how best we can support individuals and what else we might be able to offer. We had all staff participate in reinduction to Duo, but we had a particular emphasis on the NDIS and person-centredness, and we're going to have to do that again and again and again, because it's very clear that the messaging around NDIS is, because it's in part changing so much, and we're, smack bang in the middle of it, that we need our frontline people to be very clear of what the NDIS means. We undertook the NDIS Organisational Readiness Toolkit to understand how NDIS prepared we were. And then we participated in an ACT NDIS funded governance and financial management initiative, again for the preparing for our changing funding model. There will be opportunities, I would imagine, across Australia as the pilot sites start to roll out. Take full advantage of them. There is money to be had, and you can get some really good solid advice from that. More recently, we've just initiated activity-based costing work, again with government financial assistance, so that we can further understand our business practices to again improve the efficiencies and effectiveness, and in turn achieve our ambition of being recognised as the best in this changing dynamic landscape. So, last question, what advice would I give? And the list is long, and it was suggested I should cut it down, but I'm just going to give it all to you. And it's in no particular order. It's very clear all agencies will need to reevaluate their position as a provider in the new world. And a few suggestions, but as I said, there are many more, would be to be more flexible and responsive. Stop working with the old rigid ways of program delivery. Develop a stronger customer focus and have clear marketing messages of what you can provide. And that has to be for every single staff member, that they are able to deliver those messages for you. It's no good, and we've experienced these people ringing up and, we have to be, now how can we service you, as opposed to, no, we're not funded for that. So it's just a very small but very significant change. Be truly person-centred and be able to demonstrate this, not just use the words. Expect that your social business will need to change to be competitive, as well as remaining collaborative in the new environment. And I was really pleased, one of the speakers today suggested, it's look at what you do and what you do well. Don't assume you have to do everything, and know who your collaborators are in the environment in which you work. and have strong relationships with them so that you feel comfortable when someone asks, you know, can you do this? Say, no, we don't, but I can tell you an agency that would be able to provide that. So we don't have to be truly competitive against everybody. It is hard work, and ongoing and constant communication is critical with the participants, staff, the NDIA and other government-funded bodies to ensure everyone is on board and fully understanding of the change. Promote your organisation. Now, this is foreign to us, but you need to promote. So think radio spots, social media, whatever it takes, but put it in the mix of things to consider. Contribute to improvements in the NDIS as it learns, builds and changes, because it is a trial and our voice is important to improving the overall outcome. And review your service offerings. Don't be pushed into providing services you know you shouldn't be providing because you can't afford to provide it. It goes against your vision and missions, or you don't think it's safe to do so due to restrictions in the plan. And just to close off, there is no doubt over the next few years the community sector is in for a busy, challenging and very exciting period of change because of the major reforms on our doorstep. Duo has placed itself well to meet these challenges as it's now bigger and better than ever in providing the services that we know that we've got the depth and the experience to be able to provide. I expect many of you in the room will benefit from the experience being shared by all of us today. So take advantage of these learnings in readying your agency for transition. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. A great exposition of what were the challenges, what preparation did you need, and what advice would you give. The way we're going to proceed, now that things have settled down and we've all found a spot to sit, the way we're going to proceed in this session is to hear from each speaker and then to have a couple of questions of clarification for each speaker from the floor, anything that you want to pick up with, particularly from that presentation. And then at the end to throw it open to a general discussion with all three panellists participating in the discussion across the floor. But before we move to questions for Cheryl, we were to hear something from the Good 360 people. Is there someone from Good 360 in the room ready to talk to this? No? Okay, well maybe that person will be here at the end of the session. Okay, stay in tune for that. Okay, any questions then for Cheryl on what preparations she in Duo went through, what was the biggest challenge that she faced, or her advice for the rest of us? Could you identify yourself and...
Oh, should I go back?
If you could go back to the podium.
Thought I'd done my bit. Okay.
Hello, my name's Caroline. I'm a carer and an RN. And my question for you, Cheryl, is you mentioned that you had to become more flexible. Can you give us some examples of in what ways was your organisation more flexible?
Well, I think that's our journey at this point in time. So, and I think I mentioned at the end, it's about working within the plan, but not being constrained by our funding, which I think, you know, you can fall into that situation very easily. So, you know, let's look up what the contract says. Oh no, we can't do that. But now we have to think, and you know, and there's more. Can we give you more and more and more? But within, you know, being reasonable about what that more can be. Yeah.
And you also emphasised the point that this is a trial, so flexibility is really important in being able to give input back up the line about changing and refining and making things better from then on.
Flexibility might not necessarily mean additional funding, it might be just thinking about something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And part of our challenge, when I said about the communication, it's just not the NDIA to us, but it's us as service providers to our staff who are good people, but maybe have worked the same way for many, many years. And it's about supporting them to be able to change their thinking, to be able, because the immediate reaction is, oh my God, well what we're doing must be bad. And it's not bad, it's been wonderful, but we do need to think different.
So it's a great opportunity for organisational growth and development, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you talked about a new strategic plan that helps
Yes.
generate that process.
Yes.
Yeah. Another question or comment, observation? Back of the room, yes. Can you bellow?
Yeah, I think I could yell out.
Great.
Sandra B. Jonathan Cranes drafted. I'd just like to know how you will manage within the award restrictions for flexibility.
Yes.
Okay, so a question around salaries. How do you manage within the award restrictions?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important question. At this point, we're doing okay, so we're under the SHADS award. And interestingly, our staff, because we do the home community care package, they're under that stream, so we can do the minimum 1 hour. I'm very concerned about this new change to the rule in travel, and that for the first hour, the participant will only get 40 minutes, the support worker will only be paid 40 minutes, and then that 20 minutes is to be used to carry the travel. And to be honest, I don't know how it can't work. It's industrially, not possible. And so I reckon there'll be a lot of argy-bargy around that, and there should be, into the future.
One more. Yes, sir.
Ross Manning from a Ford in Sydney. You talked about block funding and IRO being whittled away.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so as part of the trial, what they've done in the ACT, instead of, I think in the other trial sites, you've maintained your funding, but there's been a bit of a balancing at the end of it. Our funding is being reduced over the next 2 years to in line with the transition of people with disabilities into the NDIS. So each quarter payment is getting less and less and less. The problem is the transition isn't occurring as expected. So as an example, and for the first quarter for Duo, it was very small, but we had 50 current clients identified as transitioning in, so our funding went down accordingly. At the end of the quarter, we knew 30 had plans, but 5 were active. So it's reliant on our cash flow to be able to cover that. Now, the ACT government and the NDIA have committed to ensuring that money, well, it actually sits with the ACT government, will give it back to us, but there's a high risk and the process of making this happen. So there will be agencies in the ACT that will be having serious cash flow problems in the very near future.
And we may hear the experiences a bit different in other trial sites, but we might hear from speakers on that too. Okay, thanks very much for that, Cheryl, and we'll continue the discussion more generally in a bit. Can I now introduce Craig Williamson from Samaritans to talk about his experience of the trial site in his workplace. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yep, cool. Just a little bit around what Samaritans does, so I can give you a little bit of context in terms of might hone your questions a little bit. Also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Darug peoples, and welcome any Aboriginal people here today. So the Samaritans Foundation, it's the welfare arm of the Anglican Church in the Diocese of Newcastle. We run in the Hunter, Western New South Wales, Mid-North Coast and the Central Coast. We employ about 600 people. We were established 30 odd years ago. Birthday celebrations have been had this year, and we've got about 800 volunteers, but they're principally used in non-funded services. About 40% of our work is disability services, but we also operate in the youth space. We've been part of the SHS reforms recently. We do some disaster recovery. We work with children. We have some mental health services, including some headspace work. And we run in child and family programs and some early intervention, which is a big space for us currently. We're in the middle of an early intervention autism pilot at the commencement of the launch site in the Newcastle LGA, and that's been an interesting journey. We also do some housing and tenancy supports. So some of our issues and challenges have been around how do you focus on change, responding to the NDIS, but only half of your business is in that zone. So in terms of the trial in the Hunter, We've got 180 people on the portal today, and we can see that we're on the portal today, and we experience sometimes when we're not on the portal, and sometimes the people we support aren't on the portal. And that's tricky, and certainly in terms of a funding arrangement, there are some systems that you'll need to put in place. An example would be if my plan, Craig Williamson's plan, was due to finish today, the 23rd of October, and someone takes it off the portal for review, but no one's made a claim against my supports for the last 3 weeks, how do we make that claim? And it's not easily done with the NDIA. We phase in with Lake Macquarie and Maitland in July 2015. Lake Macquarie's a 2-year phase-in, and we're in the second half of that. And I can't spell "and." So look at that this morning and obviously didn't get that far. Or might have been looking for the big words. It is a great social reform. The Hunter services are working well together. I think the communication is key, as mentioned prior. But I think what's lacking is the communication loop. It's not quite the 360 that we're looking for a couple of minutes ago. Sometimes it's just providing that feedback and sort of waiting for the responses. The challenges that we faced have been around the labour force. The flexibility is required and been addressed. If you've got people on casual and part-time employment and you're offering them 1-hour supports, well, they might think that's okay because they'll get paid for 2 hours under the SHADS award, but we need to roster those appropriately, and that becomes hard, and people are always looking for longer shifts. The casualisation of the workforce has its issues in terms of organisational culture and support, supervision and team meetings and professional development when you look principally at the cost and the cash flow implications of the way funding is supplied. And we've had some change in the nature of some supervisory roles, people doing stuff that they haven't done before, and people doing stuff that, with all due respect, they don't know how to do because it's a different environment. It's not their normal job, so they're learning as they go. So some of the things we've done around that is, specialising and combining rostering. Talked about the challenges of program-specific state-funded supports. Well, that's an opportunity where we've taken, in the Newcastle LGA, 7, 8 different program types. You might have your community participation in New South Wales, which is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We've got some accommodation outreach and a range of non-accommodation supports. As of July 1 this year, we put them all together and went in a more specialised way and local way. The better use of technology, and we're certainly not there, but we're trying to, when we develop our systems, make sure that they're going to be applicable and be able to be used with the technologies we're investigating. And certainly in terms of the award, there's a price and sustainability direction with the insurance scheme, and appreciate the need for that. But certainly, they've been open about some parts of the costing under the scheme, and it's aimed at level 2 on the award, which is good once you move to a level 2 environment, if people still want to work at that rate, but also has some benefits, some challenges, in terms of where do you use your level 3 staff, and planning doesn't necessarily occur at the agency. There's still a range of risks and intake processes that need to be done by someone who's probably needs to be paid higher than a level 2. Some of the process work that we've had some challenges with is the documentation and the verification of the supports that are delivered on the completion of those supports. That is quite labour intensive. Again, looking at technologies, but we're not there yet, so it takes up a bit more time than we would like. And unclear initially was the plans and the processes. So obviously the transport is being an issue for 15 months now, and continues to be. There's some issues in terms of industrial relations, but also in terms of fleet maintenance and management and the use of staff, vehicles, etc. And as I mentioned before, NGOs don't necessarily do the planning that they used to do, but when you think of most organisations are using person-centred tools to improve their processes and culture, there's still a lot that is required to be done in that space if you're the major service provider. So we're continually reviewing processes, trying to make them applicable to technologies that we've looked at, and specialising roles such as intake, claiming. We have an NDIS project officer who looks after things like meetings, some of the intake stuff where people are confused. He informs teams and goes out to families and asks and also brings back questions. We've had staff forums and we have an FAQ section on our intranet. We've had newsletters. And what is required to support a person entering the NDIS? We initiated a person-centred culture process probably 2 or 3 years ago, and part of that was the use of champions and a dedicated resource. Changing over and reinforcing some of the processes that we think we do reasonably well at in terms of being person-centred, but can always improve. The requirement for all services in the disability space to have one-page profiles and what works and what doesn't work, and those sorts of processes were really valuable in terms of supporting people to the planning meetings with the NDIA. So initially, we're the scourge of society and we're not allowed to go into a meeting room. We've had team members that I supervise, pretty capable people, be invited to a meeting by a family or a participant only to be pushed out the door. Certainly, and in terms of comparison, that's changed a great deal. Certainly, first off in the mental health space, where people sometimes may present better on Wednesday than Thursday, and may not necessarily want to go into the detail of the supports that they require when they're not having such a great day. So certainly the mental health aspect was addressed initially, and when invited, we're able to inform those processes a bit more, which is the request of the people we support. But those tools are invaluable in helping the planners actually work out what's right and what might be a useful support structure for an individual. And we review those things. So we get together with the people who are attending those meetings, and including the most important people, the people who the meeting's about, and see what information could have been done better. Sometimes we had to go back, and sometimes we didn't. So why didn't we have to go back the second time? Well, these resources might have been better informed, or we might have engaged other stakeholders. I've talked about the change of model of service delivery, going from a program and funding-based model to what's more practical, not only in terms of transport and where people may live, both the people we support and staff, but looking at who works in groups. So we had a few supervisors of group programs. You got a bucket load of the white buses and all those sorts of things. How do you better use those resources and share those? So we're now a little bit more localised and more specialised. Key initiatives have been the NDIS resource. Currently, I was in a project role for about 8 months as a transition manager. That ceased in June this year, and I'm the community services manager for Newcastle. I've been at Samaritans in a community services manager role for a number of years. Currently in the launch sites for the NDIS. So Michael's role currently following me is the information sharing, the expertise and referral points, and to develop an informed process. Some of that's because I didn't do it very well when I was there. Where we go to from that particular role is we weren't going to extend the project that I did until they worked out the processes that I hadn't completed. But that sort of information needs to be integrated within whatever structure you have. You need to have key personnel that can understand what the transport issues mean, how to get in communication with the planner. So we got there are a great bunch of people at the NDIA in Charlestown, which is in Lake Macquarie near Newcastle, but they're also learning as well. So sometimes we have planners that frustration might get the better of you, and you think, well, why would you even consider that? But they're up for feedback and review. We have some great resources, so sometimes we don't get the engagement that we require, and we might go through the people that might be able to share some information at the agency. So that's been useful, but it is something you'll need to think about: is how do you find out information or review trigger points when just sending an email sometimes doesn't work. So some suggestions that have been said infinitum over the past couple of years. Know your costs and can you be more efficient? What is your north? What services do you provide? So do you want to be everything for everyone, well, that's going to be complicated, but it may be what you want, but also not being pushed into that arena. And so I think the more we worry about the process, the less we can focus on the prize, which is how do we get through the systems, how do we navigate the risk to get to the person who it's about. So what processes are practical for your organisation, and where do you want to be in a few years? Absolutely, the integration of those sorts of ideas with conversations with your board and executives and teams is about getting it in a strat plan. So there's some accountability and some results-driven processes around that. Start the conversations. So what do you know and what do you think? What do your teams know? What are they scared of? The reason we had them staff forums was people worried about their jobs, and, you know, fair enough. Fair enough. Are we going to be here in the future? Am I getting a pay cut? What if under person-centred principles, you know, no one chooses me to work with them? Because that's how our matching is starting to work, in terms of people may not want to work with Craig, but they might choose to work with Cheryl or Vicky. Probably a good choice. But also, Cheryl or Vicky may not always be available, and how do you manage those rostering and matching processes that are, you know, integrated in person-centred practice? And we ain't there yet. But get to know how your teams and certainly the people you support are thinking. Don't reinvent the wheel. There'll be some processes that we're engaging, and if you're not in the launch sites, you might think, well, we need to do that. But think about where your organisation needs to be, because I think some of the stuff we've done over the past, will, you know, 3 years, when you think about the preparation into the launch sites, it's no use to anyone now, because things have changed that often. So transport would be one of those. So the processes that are going to make your organisation more effective and efficient are the ones you want to focus on. Not just because of the NDIA and what you hear from people like me. Don't reinvent the wheel. Get some relationships happening, so, you know, people have templates and processes and understanding that you may not have if that's not where your headspace is or priorities are at one particular point in time, and action what you can do now. It doesn't make sense to action now, or you want to wait. We're waiting around technology. I don't know if that's a smart move or not, but that's our decision, and I agree with it in some regard, because it's a big investment if it goes a bit pear-shaped. The opportunities are greater choice and control for people with a disability, and the growth often comes from change, not necessarily change for change's sake, but there is professional development. There are roles that are required and tasks in PDs that may not have been there before. It does allow and drive for more input from the people that we support, and a huge potential to strengthen practice. I think, to the chagrin of our finance team, one of the issues we encountered, you know, on the 1st of July 2015 was some people that we supported, you know, for 15, 20 years, didn't get the packages they probably, or we thought they needed. So we've got a range of people, you know, saying to me, well, they're not getting the support they need. What are you going to do about it? And I'm okay. I can agitate and all that sort of stuff, but what am I going to do about it in terms of, well, what do they need that support? So are we referring back to the objectives of not only the NDIS, but our own organisations and mission around creating independence and opportunities for independence and opportunities for risk and growth for the people we support? So, you know, we should be able to challenge our own practice that way. And, you know, it's always a good thing to... you get what are my challenges in community services are sometimes different from the challenges from my colleagues in finance or development or corporate services. So there's been healthy debates around some of that stuff, and we have a bit of a think tank once a month around, well, you know, what are we going to do about it? Well, I don't care as long as I get this. Well, it doesn't work that way. It needs to be a collaborative approach. The opportunity to review support paradigms and service models. You know, are we, you know, again, we have to challenge ourselves. Are we looking at community development when we practice? And are we challenging our roles? So you might have the money or the cash flow to provide supervision as much as we have previously, but let's not that sort of stuff scare us, because it's our responsibility to do so. So it's a work in progress. It's new and it has been overwhelming for some, and both people we support and our teams, but it is a work in progress. We are in a launch site and there's plenty of positives to come from the NDIS. One of the things philosophically I think we should challenge sometimes is the role of the NDIA in implementation. When does it back off? Because if you go to some of those principles around self-directed support, it's not necessarily replacing one bureaucracy with another, regardless of the insurance paradigms that I understand. It's not about us, the NDIA, or even the NDIS. What do we need to do as professionals to keep it about the people we support? That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. It strikes me that your situation is fairly different from Cheryl's in many ways, but there was a lot of synchronicity between the issues that you were identifying. I noticed Cheryl nodding her head quite a bit during the presentation. So there's obviously things that we can learn from each other, even though our workplaces, our service provision might be quite different in terms of how the rollout happens beyond the trial sites. So thanks for that. Do we have any questions from the floor for Craig at this point on the experience that he's gone through?
There's one up the back.
Sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name's Betty Pearson. I'm from Interchange North. I'm just interested to know, it's a bit left field, but how do you get emergency care into someone's plan? And what happens around that? Because people don't plan, or it's not a goal to have an emergency. It's not an aspiration to have an emergency.
No.
And how do you get that into their plan, and how are they supported in those times?
That's a great question. We might, if you could comment on this, and then we'll throw this to the whole panel when we come back to the bigger discussion at the end. But a quick observation for you on that issue?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, Glenda, and one that's been raised many times, and I think slightly addressed recently in terms of the bundling of supports. So while we're talking about whether we can use the word respite and whether that's illegal or not, some of those options allow you to tap into those bundles of support because they're broken down in those areas that Bruce talked about this morning. What we have understood from the agency, because we've done this a few times, we've had a couple of fires and those things, so your agency does what it always has done and goes out and does the work, and then they're also closed at 5 o'clock on Friday, like our principal funder in Samaritans is in the disability space is ADIC, so we always had block funding for most of that. But we would go back and say, look, this is what we did on the weekend. So it's either some flexibility within that plan. So whether it's built in, certainly some of the accommodation quoting is allowing a little bit of flexibility on when you provide those supports. But it takes 4 months to get the quote to happen. But yeah, so there's no clear plan unless you can use that bundling aspect.
So there's a challenge there. Okay, we might hear some more about that a little later. Okay, so we've heard from the Hunter, we've heard from the ACT. Let's move now to Victoria and hear from Vicky Cameron from Vicky, your agency is Gateways Support Services in Victoria. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land past and present. And I'm really pleased to be able to share with you our experience as a service provider in the Barwon region in Victoria. I've been in the disability sector for over 38 years, having commenced as a teacher in special ed. I moved into managing and overseeing the establishment of a number of accommodation houses for people in rural Victoria, and I currently manage respite and recreation programs for Gateways in the Barwon region. Gateways is a not-for-profit organisation and we support over 1,300 children, young people and adults with disabilities and additional needs through a range of services and supports, including early intervention, therapy services, community living, facility-based respite, placement and support for children in out-of-home care, and the range of respite and rec programs that I manage. Of all my years in the disability sector, I have to say that participating in the launch site of the NDIS has been one of the most challenging. However, we do remind ourselves in our team that Our experiences and learnings are helping to inform the full scheme rollout. We're hoping we're going to get it right for you lot. Today I'll share with you some of those challenges, how we overcame them, what was the most important preparation that we did, and hopefully give you some tips. We've been in the launch since the 1st of July feels like 2013. There's been many challenges, and I'm not sure that we've been able to overcome them yet. Change is always challenging, and we're all trying to find our way. We're trying to get some balance. This is a slide that we use with our staff at team meetings occasionally to say, how are you feeling? Where do you feel? Where are you on this tree? And that's been a really good way of actually trying to work through change. We understand that it's a change and a challenge for not only us as service providers, but for participants, for families, and for the NDIS staff as well. As much as we get a little bit kind of frustrated sometimes about what they're doing at their end, we understand that it's actually a whole new world for all of us. In relation to what was the most important preparation we did, this was really difficult as we didn't really know what the scheme was going to look like. There'd been talk, but we still didn't really know how it was going to be rolled out. Information was filtered through. In some ways, we felt that we were being drip-fed, and we were all learning on the job, and we still are. And it's difficult to prepare when the goalposts keep moving, and they do. And the NDIS policy is really being developed on the run. So it's very hard for us to consolidate. Recently, we noticed on the NDIS website their new communication marketing tag. I don't know whether you've seen it. You're going to in a minute. The 7 things that you need to know about the NDIS now. So I'm actually going to talk to you about the 7 things from a service provider's perspective. The NDIS is going ahead as planned. You know, it's important for all people with a disability that the scheme go ahead as planned. We can't go back to the old system as much as sometimes we think we want to. But the biggest ongoing challenge for service providers is to get a sustainable price under the new system. This has certainly been our biggest challenge, and we have not overcome that yet. Without a sustainable price, participants will be limited in their choice of service providers. Within the Geelong, the Barwon region, or the launch region, the City of Greater Geelong, which has been a huge HAC provider for people under 65 for disability. They've actually currently informing families that they're unable to continue to provide any services to NDIA clients due to the unsustainable price. So it's pretty significant. Without a sustainable price, quality service won't exist. And without a sustainable price, there's going to be very little innovation. Before the full scheme rollout, there needs to be a sound framework for volunteer coordination, as at the moment there's great uncertainty and certainly no direction around where the role of volunteers in an individualised service model fits. Volunteers play a significant role in our organisation, supporting children and adults with disabilities to participate in their community. Our block funding has traditionally funded the volunteer coordination, and without block funding, because it's all going into the scheme, our volunteer programs are at risk. And before the full scheme rollout, we need to understand the Tier 2. And Bruce talked about Tier 2, but we still don't really understand what the Tier 2 means and what it's going to fund. And without that, there will be significant gaps in the service system. Oh, sorry, it is going ahead as planned because the bureaucrats decided that it should. The second thing that you need to know is that people with a disability, their families and carers are at the centre of the scheme. And this is essential to strong person-centred and family-centred practice. However, the challenge with this has been that not all participants and their families and carers have actually understood the scheme. In a way, NDIS has failed to perhaps engage some of their primary stakeholders, that is the participants and the families. I recently had a parent contact me as the service she was receiving was no longer able to be provided by the service provider that they had chosen. So she rang to have a chat with me. She commented, if I knew it was going to be this hard, I would have stayed with DHS, which is Victoria's Department of Human Services. Staying with DHS was no longer a choice, and the only way she could get funded supports for her daughter was through NDIA, and she didn't really fully understand this change. And this is one of the things that we're finding in the Barwon region, is that families don't really understand this change. So there has been, in terms of the communication, there's been some lack of that about bringing families on board. Steve, who you'll get to meet shortly, one of our participants in the scheme, he commented to me, I was nervous. I didn't understand it. So that when he met with the NDIA planner, he didn't really know what to expect, what to talk about, or what to ask for. And certainly in the early days, service providers were shut out from being able to actually support participants to go along and talk about what was happening for them. The scheme assumes a certain level of empowerment of participants and their families and carers. The scheme assumes that everyone has the capacity and the skill to navigate the system. And we know that there are many participants, families and carers who require different levels of support, from minimal to intensive, and this is currently not being acknowledged or recognised by NDIA. Participants and families are left to implement their plans with little support or knowledge of where to go to seek the supports that have been identified in their plan. And in many instances, families didn't know that they had to tell us that they actually had a plan. So we were providing services. You might think, well, why weren't you asking those questions? But it was an interesting process in those early days that families felt that they had, that things would just continue in the same way that they had. But things do change. That's one of our young people, and for him the scheme has been fantastic. He's having a great life. The old system was inefficient, fragmented and unfair. We acknowledge that. It had its deficiencies, was very fragmented, and in many ways it was unfair. But we are seeing that the new scheme in its current form is shaping up to be the same. It has the potential of creating winners and losers. The winners are those participants and families and carers who are empowered, articulate and assertive. Unfortunately, we are seeing that the squeaky wheel gets a good plan. The losers are the vulnerable participants and families who are not empowered, have limited capacity to engage and are not assertive. Carers who themselves have an intellectual disability and are caring for their children who have disabilities. Ageing carers who don't understand this new system and are not supported to navigate it. Families with young children with a new diagnosis and so commencing on this whole new journey of disability and who are hesitant, having to enter a scheme that says disability. People from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and people with a mental health diagnosis. These are all very vulnerable people. They may not be empowered to drive their own plan. If you manage to get a skilled planner, then you actually get a good to an amazing plan. If you manage to strike a planner who doesn't understand autism, intellectual disability, then the plan is at risk of not meeting a participant's needs. We understand that it is an individualised model and it needs to be there. But there appears to be too many inconsistencies, and planners are interpreting the rules and the guidelines differently, so that's a challenge for us as well. The NDIS is operating throughout Australia and soon will be in Queensland. Kind of feels a little bit like a TV ad, coming your way soon. What advice can we give you? What do you need to do and think about? Press my button. Support participants and families to understand this new system. We've all been learning on the job, but now we have a better understanding of what is involved in entering the scheme, the language used, and the real process. Talk to your clients about the scheme, what it means, what they will have to do to enter the scheme, and what choices they will have. Help them to understand that the funding that you have been supporting them with now moves to the scheme, and the supports that they are getting need to be funded by the scheme. Families still didn't fully understand that the funding we had has actually gone into the scheme. They felt that we still had some buckets. We actually don't have any buckets left. There's no buckets. So they've got to come with their money. One of the difficulties about understanding the scheme, and certainly with NDIA, they had their list of participants who they were phasing into the scheme, and that went really well. We've actually got 4,000 participants in the scheme in the Barwon region. So that's an enormous number of people coming into a scheme in the first year. There were a number of people who were identified as being as being on our books and other service provider books for entering the scheme, and they hadn't been in touch with NDIA. So they would then try and get in touch with them to talk about them phasing in. And one of the things that they found, and it's about this language, they would ring families to say, we're from the National Disability Insurance Agency. Families would hear the word insurance and say, I'm okay, thank you, I don't need any, and hang up. So, language is really important in helping families to understand what the scheme is. Know what you want to deliver. Do you want to be everything to everybody or be a niche service provider? Have you got the staffing resources to meet the demand? And this has been one of our challenges. I know Craig mentioned it as well. Increased demand for direct support staff and therapy staff has been just amazing. And the region isn't ready. We don't have the volume of OTs, speech therapists, psychologists to actually meet the demand. The case management is a new word under NDIA. They don't call it case management, it's called complex support coordination. And you might get complex support coordination, or you might get complex support coordination high intensity. So one of the, I suppose it's a risk that we're taking is that we have a number of staff who are our complex support coordinators, and we're seeing it being built into some people's plans. So we've taken a risk of actually employing another full-time person. We don't have a full caseload for them, but it's really difficult if you're getting queries from NDIA or from families saying, I've got complex support coordination. Have you got capacity can you provide that service? And we don't have anybody, so do you employ somebody and have them waiting in the wings for that phone call? So, these are real challenges that you have to work out what you're going to do. Be prepared to make hard decisions. Gateways has a reputation of being a quality service provider supporting individuals with intellectual disabilities, autism and challenging behaviour. Our Board of Management is committed to providing quality services and being a strong contributor and advocate within the disability sector. So it was hard when the decision to actually close our books for the one-on-one supports was made in April this year. This meant that we were no longer accepting new clients to the scheme who were looking for the one-on-one support, as it isn't financially viable for us to do that, to offer it. The more participants we took on, the greater the financial loss. So this is a really difficult discussion for us or a decision for us to come to, and it's really hard when families participants ring us from within the region and ask, we'd like to have your service, and I actually have to say, no, I'm sorry, we can't provide that service to you. At this particular point in time, we've closed our books. We suggest you talk to Mitch Fifield and talk to him about the price.
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. I better have to speed up. Okay, have strong financial systems in place and have some sound IT systems as well. Okay, I better be quick. Over 7,300 people's lives have already been improved, and certainly there's lots of great outcomes for people with disabilities. And as I said earlier, we've got 4,000 people already in the scheme. This is Steve. Steve, under the old system, he certainly struggled to be supported, and it was fragmented and unfair for him. His NDIS plan, it's changing his life. It's fantastic for Steve. He had poor social skills, drank excessively, had limited opportunity to engage positively outside his home, and so now with weekly mentoring and support, his life is changing. It's been really exciting to actually support Steve. And we can see that such a little bit of support can make a huge difference. Our difficulty again was about, with so many people coming into the scheme, having the staff resources to do that. Steve wanted, one of his goals was to go to the Melbourne show, so he did. He's now got he's setting himself new goals and new targets, and that's a fabulous thing. Participant satisfaction is at 94%. We kind of sometimes think we wonder who they asked and what the question was, because our anecdotal evidence doesn't reflect this. Issues that families continue to raise, planners don't understand disability. One planner asked a family if the child with Down syndrome was born with Down syndrome. Difficulty getting NDIS staff to respond. The language used is a barrier, and the time taken to implement the plan. And the anxiety, we probably haven't really appreciated the anxiety that families are feeling. I talked to a mum the other day, and she was going back for her review. We're into the second year. Plans have been, they've had their first plan, they're now going in for their second. The mum was almost in tears, saying to me, I feel so anxious about going in there. And that's not fair, that's not what we wanted. The feeling that you have to prove your child's disability and the impact it actually has on you. Okay, I better speed up. The NDIS is on budget. I had that. I actually did have a slide of Joe Hockey and Matthias Cormann sitting outside having a cigar, but perhaps thought better not. Okay. The NDIS may well be on budget, but service providers in the Barwon region continue to struggle to balance their budget due to the unsustainable price for the one-on-one community participation. Initially, there were no payments for cancellations, so if the family cancelled, you can't claim. Under the modern award, you have to pay your staff if we can notify them if we don't notify them by 5 p.m. So you're having to cover that cost. They now let you have 8 cancellations. The complexities of the claiming process, the portal doesn't function adequately. Claiming is very resource intensive, often requiring manual adjustments and significant time in reconciling payments. Discrepancies with when a plan in dates and the new plan's not up on the portal, as Craig mentioned, you can't claim anything, you can't get your money back. And really the high level of unfunded work in supporting families, and we want to be able to support families and empower them, but it is a high level of unfunded work. In summary, very quickly, as a service provider in a launch site, we've a strong commitment to the participants and families that we support, and we'll continue to advocate strongly for a scheme that truly addresses the needs for all. In participating in a launch site, we see part of our role is to iron out the wrinkles before full scheme rollout. But for that to occur, we need NDIS to actually listen, respond and act on the feedback that we're actually providing them. We are privileged to be able to work and support people with disabilities and their families in what really is an enormous social change in Australia. At times it has felt like we are on a huge roller coaster, or we're in a tunnel and there's no end. The goalposts do keep moving. The policy is on the run, and we really just don't get that chance to consolidate. But we do remind ourselves that we are in a launch site. We have a huge opportunity to shape the scheme so that it is efficient, it isn't fragmented, and it is fair for all. And we will continue to fight strongly for a sustainable price. And service providers and participants and families who are here today, you also need to actually start fighting for a sustainable price if there is going to be choice, quality and a solid future for the disability sector. Thank you. That's me.
Thanks very much, Vicky. I mean, it's good to hear the glass half empty story as well as the glass
Oh, I'm
half
such a
full
glass
story.
half full person, really.
Yes, okay. But it's good to hear the kind of challenges and negative stuff as well. Can we hear one or two quick questions, and then I've got a little activity for us. Yes?
I just wanted you to expand just a little bit on that one on what the issue is with the one-on-one funding.
Okay.
So the issue around the one-on-one funding.
Yep. Okay. So in the scheme, under the support clusters, so assistance with self-care or community participation, where you've got a support worker, one worker supporting an individual. So initially when the scheme commenced, the unit cost was $34.81 per hour. And that's to pay, and our most of our workforce for the one-on-one support is casualised. So you're paying a casual, they were probably getting $25 an hour, and that leaves you with $8 an hour to pay the rest.
Everything else.
To have your service, to cover the travel. Travel is an enormous issue within the scheme. So in terms of covering the cost of getting your worker to an individual, but it's also about that $8 has to cover the cost of claiming your money back, and it's very unwieldy. The cost of your training, the cost of your quality, all of that. So they put the price up on the 1st of July this year. We're still not, the price in South Australia is $41. We get $38, and we continue to say, well, why are we only getting $38? They put the price up on the 1st of July to $38 and said that we'll do this, but come the full scheme rollout, they're going to put the price back. By then we'll all have learnt to be more efficient. So the one-on-one price is significant.
Okay, so that is a challenge. Okay, one final question. Yes?
Just to follow on from that question, are people in the trial site seeing the emergence of private care agencies who are willing to deliver services at the lower prices because they're not paying the award?
Yeah, we are seeing a few. We're probably not seeing as many as NDIS may have expected. And I remember going to a meeting where one of the major service providers actually said that people overseas, there were organisations overseas looking at us, ready to kind of jump in, and I'm thinking, really? Why? Why would you come in? Yeah, I think that it will depend. I think the larger organisations, if you've got other sources of funding that can help kind of cross-subsidise, you will be okay. And the smaller ones, again, though, in terms of quality, the idea that you have to be a registered provider and you do have to meet the quality standards, that can have a huge impact on being able to actually do that as well, because that costs money.
Craig and Cheryl, are you seeing any of these third-party providers coming forward?
No, I think similar experience, and in fact we've got a couple of for-profits already working in the ACT, and they're speaking out against the pricing as well. It absolutely is a big issue.
Great.
Yeah, I think most people in most organisations in the HUNA sort of operate, based on level 3 awards around, not many of them are under $40 an hour. and I think that's not an inefficient price, except for in NDIA's eyes. A couple of providers that probably can do it, the level 2 stuff that have hit the launch site and commenced support, so they're actually, their labour force is commencing at that lower rate. Whether Boopers and Coles and Woolworths make a move, I think they are looking,
They're talking about it.
If they take on a massive stuff, well, they have the infrastructure to do things cheaper than a $40 million company. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, all three of you. You people have been very diligently sitting quietly for an hour listening to all this. What I'd like to do now is fairly challenging with 150 odd people in this room. I'm going to ask you to think about what you've heard and try to distill in your own head what's the one key insight that you've gained from the three presenters this morning. It might be an unresolved issue that you want a definite answer to. It might be some encouragement, some reinforcement of what you're doing at the moment, or it might be some exciting challenge about getting involved with the NDIS from this point on. But what's the one key insight from the presentations you've heard this morning that's really struck you? And I'm going to ask you to share that with the person beside you. And the way we're going to do that, because we're going to have a hell of a lot of noise in here in a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand, having thought through this key insight that you've had, turn and talk to the person next to you and swap ideas about the key insight that you've had from the presentation, and then look around you, and as you see people starting to sit down, stop talking and sit down. Okay, that's how we'll finish it up, by all sitting down. Okay, so if you'd stand, think about your key insight, share it with the person beside you, and when you notice people sitting down, sit down. I think if you look around, you'll see a few people sitting down. And as you sit down, the conversation stops. As you're sitting down, thank you, the conversation stops. Some people's insights are still happening? Okay. Thank you. These three people had some big insights to share. It took them a long time to wind up. Okay. How was that? I'm going to invite you now to around the room just to share something that you heard somebody else say, an insight that your partner or somebody beside you said, or a question that was raised, and we might get some comments bounced off the panel as well. So anyone want to kick off? What was the key insight that you heard or you made? Yep.
The discussion I heard was you were saying how families are so anxious about going to the planner. We're trying to work out why are they so anxious. That was the question I heard. Why is there so much anxiety around it? It should be a good process of change. Why is that seen as a negative?
There's a microphone there if you could share. Just a quick comment each, or Craig?
Because it's all very new to them, and they have to go and, well, in some ways prove their child's disability, and that's what's created the anxiety. A number of a family came in and saw me. She should have probably been in the scheme much, much earlier, and she only just came to last week to say, I haven't gone in yet. And when she spoke with the scheme, they raised her anxiety because they said, you've got to have all the assessments. You know, he's 18. He had his autism assessment when he was 3, 15 years ago. So her anxiety is, well, where do I find that? Well, I haven't kept. Well, she's probably kept it, but she can't find it. So the anxiety is kind of being raised by how families are being communicated to.
So a new process will often have new strictures placed on it. Yeah. Yep. Cheryl, do you have something to comment on that?
Look, I might just add, and the experiences I'm seeing as well, we've got very new planners. They've got a very strong processes that they have to follow. And so being that little bit person-centred maybe just misses the mark somewhat. So people are needing to demonstrate that there is a disability and the level of disability, and they can't find the information. There's a whole host of reasons, I think, that just increases that anxiety. And understanding the language, that's a really big one. And also they've been told, even though the engagement with service providers is much better, don't show your plan to your service provider. Like, do not do this. And so families are coming to providers really concerned, saying, look, we're really not meant to show you this, but they need the people that they know to try and work with them to understand it. So, there's a whole host of reasons.
Okay, Craig, a quick comment, or enough's been said? Okay, so a new process will bring with it anxiety just because it's about a change in process. But no, not entirely satisfied?
I disagree entirely.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
In my experience, yes, what you said is true to some degree, but I don't think that's the overarching reason. I think they're scared that if they show their plan, that there will be an automatic, well, no. So what they want to do is, well, what can you offer me? And then we will take from that, well, this would suit me and this wouldn't. But still, we've got our overall plan. I think it's a fear of, with various past experience with various departments of, well, if you tell us what we want, that's the sure thing you're not going to get.
Okay.
That's my experience.
Okay.
And the other issue that we didn't actually have 1 second to discuss that issue, and that's why I didn't chase it, but this lady's point about strategic planning and the need for it to filter down was also very, very vital, and that's a difficult thing to do, and to have checklists and keep coming back to people and reassessing your staff. Are you understanding this? What did you glean from it? Report back to me what you understood about what we just taught you. Because if the filtering, the trickle down effect, I can think that I've spoken to everyone and everybody in the room understood me, but it won't necessarily be so. They have to keep getting back and getting back to your stuff. What have you understood and what have you gleaned from it, which is what you're doing here.
I'm sure there's lots of implications for organisational development and training within organisations of varying sizes about how communication happens, how relationships among staff are maintained, how reporting happens. Yeah, great points. Thank you very much. Somebody else's insights, question, comment? Let's go to the back of the room. Yes, Sue.
Just in regards to your workforce, did you have to recruit more casuals? Have you changed contracts to permanent staff so they have a lower contract hours? And if so, if you did take on more casuals, how much training do you provide on those sort of, how integrate are they into your organisation as casuals?
So the role of casuals within the rollout. Vicky?
We've always been employing more staff. This hasn't really changed that. We're probably employing more on a more regular basis than what perhaps we had been, but we always have found that we continually need to get more staff because they find other positions that don't require weekend work, after hours work. So, and we have a lot of staff who are university students and they bring great value to our organisation. But of course, once they've got their qualification, they move on. So we are always actually recruiting staff.
It's a perennial problem, isn't it? Craig?
Yeah, we didn't put on permanent contracts, additional permanent contracts from the beginning of the launch site in Newcastle, just till we found out how many of our existing people would stay. And I think in the Hunter, as well as probably across the nation in the launch sites, I think 95-96% of people have stayed. So we're in the process now of just allocating, doing a bit of data crunching and putting on some permanent contracts where people are doing lots of casual hours. I think there's a benefit from us, from an organisation, in terms of your organisational culture and your drive towards that vision. And I think the same is reflected in your training. Training budgets are always going to be a little bit hard, but it's almost like that early intervention. If you want people to practice within the culture of your organisation and providing really good person-centred support, it's too late if you haven't provided the training. Like, the costs get greater and a number of things. So it's about what's important and then trying to see how you do it.
Cheryl.
So I might just add, we've continued to employ both casual and permanent, and we really that's a choice and suits the flexibility of the different people that we employ. In relation to our training, we have reviewed our training plan for the year, and we definitely need to cut back on costs there. One way we're doing that, we're stepping in to try online induction. But yeah, training must be an ongoing part of your business because that goes to the quality of the service and meeting standards and so on.
Thank you. Great. Another question, comment or observation from your discussion? Yes?
I just wanted to ask about that training. Do you involve consumers to come in and help train the staff?
Are consumers involved in the training of staff?
We do. Particularly in our induction, and in part about so they can share their story, and so that's really valuable for people new to the sector to understand, what they're really doing.
To hear the lived experience of people. Yep, great. Thank you. And then you. Thank you, sorry.
I'm just hearing a difference. Like, we had Bruce Bonnie-Hady saying the skiing this morning would be sustainable. But the three speakers have all said that it's been very challenging so far to be sustainable. The one-on-one care is a real difficulty. And I know informal care has been brought up a lot. Now, I'm a parent, informal unpaid carer, and I was saying that I don't know anyone who really wants to look after my daughter with very challenging behaviours in all her 22 years. And not be paid for it, So there's going to be a lot of people with challenging behaviours or very high support needs that will continue to need that one-on-one care. How's that going to be sustainable?
Craig, do you want to kick that off? Not that we're going to give you the silver bullet answer here.
I think it's a good point, and informal supports are part of the puzzle, maybe not all of the supports, and certainly as an agency and a sector, I think we realise that paid supports are not always the best supports because of the nature of the relationship. In terms of people with complex needs, there's a slightly higher payment that still would be unsustainable on the one-on-one scale. I think the learnings for us around that in the Hunter will come in the next 12 months as they continue the devolution of what we call in New South Wales the Hunter residences. So the Stockton Centre is a rather large residential support environment currently run by our state-based funding body, ADIC and Family Community Services. And that's coming out to the community. They'll need to organise all the capital sorts of processes there. But again, I support the idea that we advocate around this particular issue because, you know, I've been in day programs and accommodation for a few years, but you would get providers that people who are more likely to get employment, for example, because that's their niche and and that's fine. And then we and a few other organisations in the Hunter might, our mission is not to say no to anyone we can help. If someone can provide better supports, we'll refer that people, you know, open door sort of process. But it needs to be paid for and supported well, and the complex support coordination factors into that a little bit, but not on the one-to-one basis, and it is something we need to advocate for, I think.
Just to re-emphasise, it is a trial, it is rolling out, it is developmental, so these questions need to be, as you're doing, brought to the surface all the time and fed back into. Cheryl, a quick comment from you on this one? Or are you happy with what's been said?
Well, I just think pricing is critical and we can't lose sight of it. And so it is a trial, we are learning, but we need to keep inputting as best we can to the NDIA to ensure that they actually fully understand. It's not just us, complaining.
Okay, now's your big chance.
I'm just going back to workforce when we talked about flexibility. The responses that I mostly heard were about the proportion of casual to more permanent staff ratios. I just want to ask, are you at a point where you're looking at innovations other than casualisation or ratios to achieve workforce flexibility?
Okay, so the question is about flexibility in workforce provision, not just casuals. Are there other things that people are trying? Very briefly?
One of the things that we've been looking at is, because that one-on-one support is great, but can we actually bring people together? Can we help develop friendships between people and have one staff member and two people going out and doing something instead of having one staff member and one client?
Okay, so very flexible arrangements with...
Looking at that flexibility.
Yep. Great.
And also, how do you provide, from a more boring point of view, technology and information management systems that allow you to mitigate the 1 and 2 hour shifts and things like that, so you're matching up in terms of your person-centred principles, but you've also got a gamut of information that someone can understand quickly to allocate a staff member.
iPads for everyone. Cheryl?
Look, I think there are other options out there, but it's also very clear there's a lot of things that are one-on-one. Personal care, domestic assistance, and respite in a person's home, and they're all the same price.
Okay, lots of questions still happening. Keep these conversations alive in the rest of the meeting, the rest of the conference and beyond. I just want to wrap up though by asking each of the 3 people on the panel a question about the organisation that they were involved with. This is a trial, remember, and many of the organisations, many of your agencies will be involved in the rollout from further down the track. But I want to hear from each of you in one word, one quick word. What was the one quality or attribute of your organisation that stood you in best stead for this work? What is it? What was the strength or the attribute or the benefit within your organisation that has helped you most in this whole rollout?
One word, our people.
Great.
Our relationships.
Listening.
Listening. Okay. The ability to listen. Okay, please join with me in thanking our 3 presenters. And thank you very much. It's now lunchtime.